You know, when you see those images of polluted rivers or you hear about forests shrinking, what's the first thing that comes to mind? Probably science, right? But what if I told you the biggest environmental battles aren't really fought in labs, but in the halls of power? Today, we're going to dig into how the fate of our planet is being decided not just by scientists, but by politicians. So, let's start with that big question. Is a polluted river just a science problem? Well, the answer is a whole lot more complicated and honestly, way more political than you might think. Let's get into it. Because the real answer, the one that actually makes things happen, is found in politics. You see, the second a government has to make a choice, who's to blame, who has to pay for the cleanup, who gets to use the resources, that's the moment an environmental issue becomes a political one. So here's our roadmap. First, we'll break down exactly why the environment is so political. Then we'll look at some of the biggest problems our planet is facing. After that, we'll see how the world has tried to respond. We'll zoom in on India as a case study. And finally, we'll talk about the growing conflicts over the Earth's resources. All right, let's dive into part one. We're going to establish that fundamental link between protecting our planet and making some really tough political decisions. It really all boils down to these four questions. And notice, these aren't about biology or chemistry. They're about fairness, money, and power. Who's causing the damage? Who's suffering the consequences? Who should clean up the mess? And maybe the biggest one, who gets to use the Earth stuff and how much can they take? The answers to these are decided in parliaments and international summits, not in a lab.
Okay, on to our next section. Let's look at the actual problems, the urgent challenges that have forced this whole conversation onto the world stage in the first place.
Take this number in for a second. 663 million. That is how many people on our planet right now don't have access to safe, clean drinking water. It's a mind-boggling number, and it represents a life-or-death crisis every single day for millions. And the human cost of that crisis is just devastating. Every year, 3 million children die from diseases they got from dirty water, diseases that are totally preventable. So when we talk about these political debates, the stakes couldn't be higher. And of course, the problems don't stop with water. We're also dealing with farmland that's losing its fertility, making it harder to grow food. We're seeing massive deforestation, and we have to worry about the hole in the ozone layer, which puts us all at greater risk. Every single one of these requires a massive, coordinated global effort. This quote, it just hits hard. It comes from people who live near the Aral Sea, which used to be one of the largest lakes in the world. Now it's basically a desert, all because its water was diverted for farming. It's a dark joke, but it perfectly captures that feeling of frustration when people see their world disappear while others just study the problem. So when you're faced with challenges this massive, how does the world even begin to respond? In this next part, we're going to look at the history of global environmental movements and some of the big ideas that came from them. You know, the global environmental movement wasn't born overnight. It started with some really stark warnings back in the 70s, like the Limits to Growth report. Then, by 1987, we got this new idea of sustainable development. And it all came to a head in 1992 at the Rio Earth Summit, which brought pretty much the whole world together and put climate change on the political map for good. Now, out of all these big global talks came this really key idea. It's a bit of a mouthful: common but differentiated responsibilities. But the concept is actually pretty simple. It means, hey, we all share one planet, so we're all responsible. But, and this is the important part, the countries that have been polluting for much longer, the ones that got rich doing it, they have a bigger responsibility to lead the cleanup.
And this one idea basically sets up the central conflict in almost every climate negotiation, what people call the North-South divide. On one side, you have the developed countries, the North, who say everyone needs to cut emissions. On the other, you have the developing countries, the South, who say, wait a minute, you guys caused most of this mess while building your economies. We need the chance to grow too.
This all leads to the idea of the global commons. Just think about things that nobody can really own, right? Like the air we all breathe, or the vast oceans, or even Antarctica. You can't put a fence around the atmosphere. So if we want to protect them, everyone has to agree to do it together through international treaties. Okay, so let's bring these big global concepts down to earth. How does a major developing country like India actually deal with all this? And what happens when ordinary people decide to take a stand? So what does this look like on the ground? Well, in a country like India, you see some really big moves. There's a national policy for cleaner gasoline, laws to conserve energy and promote renewables, and one of the most ambitious renewable energy programs in the entire world. So there's a lot happening at home. But when India shows up to international negotiations, its argument is all about fairness. The government's position is really clear. Yeah, our total emissions might be big because we have a lot of people, but if you look at the pollution per person, per capita, it's tiny compared to the developed world. That argument is a cornerstone of their whole approach. But government policy is only half the picture. Some of the most powerful changes have come from the ground up. You've got these incredible grassroots movements, like the Chipko movement, where people literally hugged trees to stop them from being cut down, or the fight against building large dams. It just goes to show that ordinary citizens can be a massive force for change. And for our last section, we're going to look at the sharpest edge of all this, the direct competition, and sometimes conflict, over the planet's most vital natural resources. This one chart tells you so much about geopolitics. A whopping 64% of all the known oil reserves in the world are in West Asia. And when you have a global economy that runs on oil, that single fact has been the source of incredible competition and, let's be honest, a lot of conflict. And it's not just about oil anymore. Water, the most basic thing for life, is becoming a huge source of political tension. When several countries all depend on the same river, any dispute over how to use that water can blow up into a serious international conflict. Some people have even started calling them water wars. Which really brings us full circle, back to the most fundamental question of them all. On a planet with a limited supply of everything and a growing number of people, who gets to use what's left? And maybe even more importantly, who decides? The answer to that question is being fought for every single day in global summits, in street protests, and in quiet government meetings. That struggle, that's the real heart of global environmental politics. Thanks so much for joining us.